Okay. I'll read this. Just bear with me. As you know, it's a few minutes. So, introduction to remote learning. This meeting of the Beverly Charter Review Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020. Due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth, due to the outbreak of COVID-19, I would like to announce that this meeting is being recorded by the City of Beverly and live streamed by BevCam on both Channel 99 and by Beverly Cam's YouTube channel. I am confirming all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Okay. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised by and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend all public hearings, gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspended the requirement of open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so as long as adequate alternative public access is afforded to the public, can follow along with deliberations of the meeting. Assuring public access does not ensure public participation unless participation is required by law. This meeting does have public participation. Accordingly, please be aware that all participants or viewers may be able to see you or hear you, and anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. You have the option to turn off your video if you are participating via computer. All participants should keep their microphones or phones muted unless recognized by me to reduce the background noise and feedback. Please wait until the person speaking has finished before speaking so we can clearly hear all participants. Meeting ground rules for the public hearings. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, I will invite the committee to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please remember to mute your phones, as I said, or computer when you are not speaking. You may not mute yourself or be muted by the host by clicking the microphone, mute, and unmute icon. Pressing the mute button on your telephone or by pressing *6 on your telephone keypad. Please reserve the chat function for technical difficulties and strictly the City Council, not for public comment. Please remember to speak clearly in a way to help generate accurate minutes. For any response, please take your name and affiliation before speaking. Regarding public comment, after the members have spoken, I will forward public comment as follows. I will first ask members of the public who wish to speak to identify their names and addresses only. Please write your name and address in that chat function. Once I have the list of all public commentators, I will call on each of you by name and afford 3 minutes for any public comments. So to a motion to approve all this, I will go in order. Councilor Ames.
Yes.
Ms. Bowen.
Quick question first, just on the timing, that 3-minute limit, given that it doesn't look like we have so many people, can we extend that a little bit?
Yeah, we just kind of, that's fine. I have no problem with that. I'll just kind of, and people might be joining us later on, but I don't think it's a major difference. So thanks for pointing that out.
Great. And yes to all the general things there.
Okay. Mr. Silva.
Yes.
Mr. Dinkin. Okay, I got a thumbs up. Mr. Pinciaro.
Yes.
And myself, yes. Okay, we're gonna have a little meeting today. Our first public hearing. And just for anybody who has joined us, we have had we've been meeting for about 2 months and gone through all the articles of the charter, the Home Rule Charter, and we've also invited the mayor, the school committee president, Rich Abel. We've also had Brian Ailes, our finance director, on as well. Mr. Perry, who is our budget analyst, has been extremely helpful in helping us in some technical areas. Stephanie Williams, our city solicitor, has also been helpful, as has the Collins Center, and given us some guidance. And after this public hearing, they will be more involved as we move forward. And then probably the next few weeks after this public hearing, we'll gather all the information. We'll go article by article and discuss what we think we want to vote on. and then we'll take a vote within this committee, and then we'll send it to the city council and the mayor to get their approval, and then it'll go on to the state if it does pass from there. If any members of the committee have any questions or something that I have missed, this would be an opportune time to do that. And if not, then we'll open it up to the public hearing. All set? Okay. Does any members of the public wish to speak on the charter that we've been discussing?
I would. I don't know how to use the chat function, sorry, but I would like to speak.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to have Miss Silverstein go first. I believe she had her hand up first, and then Mr. Grimes, I will go to you after that.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty, and thank you for having a public hearing on the charter. As some of you know, my name is Chris Silverstein, and I live at 44 Longmeadow Road. And as some of you know, I was on the school committee for many years, and I have some thoughts that have been sort of rumbling around in my brain for the entire 10 years that I was on the school committee. I have been trying to follow your meetings and pay attention to minutes, but I'm sure I've missed a lot. But one of the things that intrigued me was the idea of a school committee at large. I think you were talking about having a few positions that way. And I don't know, Councilor Flaherty, if you remember this, or Mr. Grimes or Mr. Dinkin, if you remember that years back, there were school committee at large people. And there's a reason why we went to ward representation. Part of it is, I guess I should say for my own self-interest, Ward 3 was underrepresented at that time. And I think having ward representation and keeping that is critical to having a broad representation across the city. But I also think that considering at-large positions is also a good idea. I think it would get more people on the school committee and, get some more involvement. One of the things I struggled with as a school committee member is trying to get people involved and having people pay attention to the issues and not just come to the conversation when big issues were on the table, but to be part of the conversation all of the time. So good for you for considering at-large positions. I think that could be a benefit to our city. I also, in my 10 years experience on the school committee, it taught me that you are always learning, and you probably know this at any committee seat. However, I think it's important for you all to think about the terms that people are serving on our elected boards, our city council and school committee in particular. That first year is a real learning curve. And once somebody learns the ropes, then the way that the city is doing it now, or the way the charter says now, then if you want to run to have your seat again, you're running for re-election a year and a half into your term. And so your learning curve is now complicated with political campaigning. And I can tell you both things are a lot of work, and you all know that. So I also think that if the term is a little bit longer, not quite 4 years, but maybe even a 3-year term, then, you could, get your goals out to your constituents, get your vision out there, and then really work on it over those 3 years and possibly see some of your goals and your vision come true by the end of your term. It also gives you time to really dive into the issues versus then, a year and a half in having to run for a campaign. So the way that our charter is set up now, having city council and school committee every 2 years for re-election, it does put us in danger of possibly, and I've not seen it, but as a school committee president, I was worried about this, possibly having a brand new school committee and city council all in the same year. And my experience has also been that I've learned a lot from my predecessors, and I've learned a lot from sitting at the table with people who have come before me and served with me. And I think it's imperative that we learn from each other and take the history and grab it and carry it forward. Not that we have to repeat history, but we can learn from it. And, we can really capitalize on the greatness, and we can kind of learn from the things that didn't go so well. And, so to me, a 3-year term is, I don't know, it just makes a little more sense to me. The other thing about what I see happening in some other cities is they alternate elections so that, not everybody is up for reelection in the same year, so that you're not in that danger of having you're not in danger of having all brand new committee members in the same year. And I don't know if that would be a bad thing. I just think it would be a concerning thing from my perspective, and that's just me as a citizen of the city. I think it's helpful to have experience on the committees. And then I know you were also talking about the term for mayor, and I did a little bit of research, and according to the National League of Cities in 2006, the majority of cities, it's most common for mayors to have a 4-year term versus a 2-year term. And for the same reason, I mean, there are pros and cons to all of these, but a 2-year term for our mayor is really short. And again, for a mayor to be able to realize his or her vision and goals, it's tough to do in a 2-year term and then be campaigning a year and a half into your first term anyway. But one of the pros of a 2-year term is that you're constantly in contact with your constituents because you're campaigning a lot. So I guess I would ask you to consider, like you have been, a 4-year term for the mayor. I think it makes good sense for Beverly. And then finally, I would like you to really think about the compensation for school committee and city council. And I'm sad to not see President Guanci there, because he said to me for many years that the job of the school committee is much more difficult than the job of the city council. And no disrespect to city council, but school committee does meet a whole lot more. School committee is in a 24/7 job, connected to your constituents. And even though it's only schools, it's also school budget, it's school human resources, it's everything to do with the schools, which takes up half of our city budget. So rather than having the school committee make about half of the salary that city council makes, wouldn't it make sense to take the whole pool of money and divide it among everybody, with the president position, the president's getting a little bit more because they do more work in organizing and keeping everybody, connected to the meetings and so forth. So, I don't see a reason why the compensation for school committee is so far less than it is for city council. So those are my few thoughts and things that really have been rumbling around in my mind for the better part of 10 years while I served. And I thank you for your time to speak, and I thank you for your work on this project. It is a big project, and I wish you good luck with going forward with it. Thanks.
Chris, can I get your address as well?
Sure, it's 44 Longmeadow Road.
Thank you. And before we go on to Mr. Grimes, I just want to answer some of your questions a little bit. The at-large was removed on the last time go around on the charter, and Mr. Grimes can kind of correct me on a few things as well. But I think the idea was when they believed that the school committee role had changed so much that they kind of wanted to fine tune it, but we really wanted to make sure that the wards are represented during the time. Because when they had the at-large, the school committee's roles, like before Proposition 2.5, was a lot more prominent. But the idea doesn't mean we can't go change back what you're talking about. The 3-year term, I don't know why, but there's some reason why we can't do a 3-year term, I believe. But Mr. Grimes might be able to have a good answer on that. And the other one on finances, it's interesting because the school committee president at the time, when we were going over this charter, basically he recommended and talked to the school committee and said, "Do you guys ever be okay with this?" And so that's kind of where that continue to stay as it always has been. The discrepancy with the schools committee and the city council doesn't mean we can't change it, but it's not on a charter level. That's more on an ordinance level that we would change on that. So we can change that anytime. Not anytime, but it has to go through ordinance. So hopefully that answers some of your questions on that. All right, let's go to Mr. Grimes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for your attention and your service. If I might, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, let me briefly comment on some of the things you just said and that Ms. Silverstein said. The problem with the 3-year term is the arithmetic works out that you inevitably end up with municipal elections the same year as state elections, and that is prohibited by state law. So that can't be. It could be, you could do 4, you can do 2, because obviously then the arithmetic works. With regard to changing, lengthening the terms of the mayor or of the council, that can only be proposed by an elected charter commission. It cannot be proposed by a committee such as this. And because we're a home rule charter, it's not clear to me even the state legislature can do it. But so that's the law. The length of elected officials' terms, not sure if it applies to the school committee, can only be done by an elected commission. With regard, just very briefly, to the longer term for mayor, as you know, Mr. Chairman, I was an advocate for that in the deliberations of the 1995 charter. Very fortunately, I was outvoted. I have come to conclude it would be a mistake. As Ms. Silverstein said, the advantage of the 2-year term is the mayor must be constantly in position and in touch with the needs and wishes of his or her constituents. As you'll hear from my remarks, I think the mayor is strong enough without giving him 4 years. If I might now go on to my own comments. Mr. Chairman, please understand that these comments are expression of my opinion and do not reflect criticism of any individual's action or inaction by any individual or group of individuals. Rather, they relate to the best governance for the city of Beverly. As you know, I chaired the commission that drafted this charter, a commission, of course, on which you serve, Mr. Chairman. I further chaired the first of these charter mandated review committees, one that met in 2000. Councilor Guanci served on that committee. It was an honor to serve both of those roles. What I'm going to give you, as I have a longer document that I've shared with a couple of you that I will send to the committee, I assume by way of the city clerk. Is that the way to do it, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, that'd be fine. That'd be appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. But what I want to do is just touch on highlights. I'll be glad to go into further depth, but you know, I have been called the deepest well of words on the North Shore, so I'll try to keep it brief as I can. That longer document, by the way, includes specific language that I believe addresses the issues that I raise. I think this charter is a good one, well thought out and crafted. On a personal note, I consider this charter to be one of the things that I've done in my life of which I am most proud. But with that said, a generation of experience under the charter with several different mayors and numerous city councilors have demonstrated that some things in the charter were not well written and or have been misconstrued. In general, the overriding issue that has arisen in the time under the charter is the gradual consolidation of power in the mayor at the expense principally of the city council. The underlying assumption on which this charter was built was that by giving the mayor clear power and responsibilities while creating clear powers and independence in the city council, the mayor's power would be balanced. Thus, the electorate could more clearly know who to credit for success or who to blame for shortcomings. In short, the charter is a classic American checks and balances system. But such a system only works if the components exercise and defend their respective power, and those powers are distributed in an appropriate manner. Instead, the inherent advantages of the office of mayor, including information access and legal advice, has had the effect that in the political give or take, the power of the city council has been eroded. Ambiguities in the document have been repeatedly interpreted to weaken the city council and strengthen the mayor. Several specific examples of this phenomenon need to be addressed, in my opinion. First, as to the budget management analyst. The 1995 charter created a new position, the budget management analyst, elected by the city council. The budget management analyst is given full access to all the financial operations of the city, but has no responsibility for or power over those operations. Rather, the budget management analyst gathers information for the council and provides the council with financial and operational advice independent of the administration. However, the city solicitor has incorrectly, in my opinion, asserted that the charter intended the budget management analyst to be a city employee rather than an independent consultant. While one must assume, as I do, the good faith of the city procurement officer, the administration, and whoever else may be involved, there's a saying in the law, whose seed he eats, his song he sings. The person who hires you is quite likely to have influence over you as time goes forward. I would suggest, and I have language provided to make clear, the budget management analyst works for the council, is picked by the council, answers to the council. The next issue that I believe has significantly affected the erosion of the city council is that the single biggest disadvantage of the city council in its give and take with the mayor is that the interpretation of the city's council's power is itself in the hands of the administration, namely the city legal department, which is, of course, under the control of the mayor. Birds and seeds and songs again. Even those competent and honorable professionals may tend to favor the office that has the power to hire, fire, and compensate. The solution is to guarantee to the council independent legal advice with ultimate recourse to the courts regarding the exercise of its own and mayoral power. There are a couple of issues with regard to the submission of the mayor's budget proposal. Perhaps the most important single thing the council does. The charter says only that the budget is to be submitted at, quote, the time fixed by law, end quote. This is an apparent reference to Chapter 44 of the general laws. That then gives the council 60 days. However, the way the state budget process actually works has made that largely impractical, with the result that the mayors have generally submitted their budget on June 1st. Since the budget must be approved by June 30th, in reality, the council has only 30 days, not the 60 days that the charter says it should have. So there was language I would suggest that would solve that problem. Another important thing that has arisen is consideration of the school committee budget. State law creates for an exception for school funding in the approval of the budget. It's the only element of funding that allows the council by 2/3 vote to increase funding above the level that the mayor has proposed. Unfortunately, the false view has arisen that the school committee has to, quote, balance, end quote, its budget, matching indications from the mayor of the amount intended to be proposed in the mayor's submission to the city council. This completely misstates the process. In fact, I believe the charter already says, but I believe language should be added to make clear that the committee, in submission of its budget, can submit whatever it believes is needed for the maintenance of the schools. The mayor has three weeks by statute or charter, I'm not sure which, to figure out how that fits in the whole view. If the council, by 2/3 vote, believes that the mayor has proposed an inadequate amount, it can increase the mayor's budget proposal for the school committees as long as the entire budget remains in balance. Again, I think this is already the law, but the city solicitor has expressed a different view. Finally, I need hardly tell the councilors in our group that one of the greatest matters of practical importance to the people of the city is the maintenance and improvement of the infrastructure and capital facilities, the roads and other things that we use. Now, the charter requires that the mayor submit a capital improvement plan. I suggest that the charter require language regarding the road paving plans within that larger capital improvement plan to give some people some idea. Now, obviously, a lot of it is unpredictable. Where's the money coming from? How long the projects take? But some idea, at least, of sequence of road work. I may have said finally, I'll take that back. Finally, the organization of city agencies. Under the charter, city agencies can be organized in one of two ways. They can be organized by ordinance passed by the council with the mayor's approval or over his veto, or by administrative code issued by the mayor, approved by a majority of the council, or actually subject to disapproval. I think the council can just do nothing, it takes effect. We created that administrative, I shouldn't say we, pardon my possessiveness, the commission created that alternative to allow the managerial talent of the mayor to decide how government should be organized and not necessarily have the council decide. The problem is that both methods still exist, and while extensive efforts have been made to coordinate those changes, inevitably some what we would call in the law conflict of law problems have arisen as to which body controls exactly which. My suggestion is that language be added to the charter to write into the charter certain things that are standard law of statutory construction. Namely, the more specific provision governs the more general. That's already in the charter. Next, that the most recently enacted legislation, whether it be code or ordinance, the most recently enacted controls, so that it would be perfectly clear at all times, well, this was more, maybe you didn't change it. And finally, that when either an ordinance is changed or the code is changed, that there be explicit language as to what is being changed in the other document, if anything, so that it'll be perfectly clear what is the governing law at all points in time. I thank you for your attention. I'll be glad to, if anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them, but that's my view at this time. Thank you.
Can we have your address just to make sure, Charlie?
116 Rantoul Street, number 310 in Beverly.
Okay, I want to go to Rachel Abel, but before I do that, I just want to Julie, do you have something specific to ask that? Go ahead, Julie. Then we'll go to Rachel.
I just wanted to make two comments. One, I thought the language, thanks for your comments, by the way, Mr. Grimes, but I thought the language about the budget analyst was really strong. And I just felt that throughout this whole process, it's been very clear that the budget analyst works for the city council, just from Jerry Perry's participation in this process, but also making it very clear to us all along that that's the case. So I feel that that role is very strongly a city council role, and I just wanted to say that I think that's been very clear in the process. And then the other comment I had was I don't recall discussing capital improvement when we went through our whole process. I'm sure that we did, but as a lifelong resident here, I know that the woes of roads is definitely a thing that people are always wondering why a road is picked over another or whatever. And I like that idea of having some specific language about roads in the capital improvement plan. And I just wanted to get it on record that was something I want us to think about and discuss further. And that's all I had.
I want to allow Charlie to respond to that, and then we can move on to Rachel.
Great. Thank you very much. With regard to the budget management analyst, Julie, I agree with you. I think it's perfectly clear it's supposed to be. The city solicitor was of the view that, like every other procurement by the city, that procurement took place under the control of the city's procurement officer. Now, the exact nuts and bolts of how that operated, I don't know. Chairman, perhaps you can tell us more. But, and again, I have confidence in the intention, the good intentions and capacity of all these individuals, but it should be clear, who do you work for? And that's likely to be the people who hired you and controlled your hiring.
We can take a look at that. Thank you. Stacy, is it related to this? Because I want to go to Rachel, but it is. Okay, go ahead,
Just
Stacy.
quickly, I really appreciate everything that Julie said, and thank you very much, Charlie. I think are you referring to the audit, who procures and chooses the audit firm for the city rather than the budget analyst? Because I think that's where our conversations have been in the past, just as a clarifying comment.
The selection of the outside auditor is a different issue that's actually worth consideration. No, I'm talking about the budget management analyst. It is a position created, guaranteed to be funded at half of the city's finance director, giving advice to the city council, it's just should be perfectly clear. This is not the administration's person. This is the council's person, from the first application to the last goodbye. And I don't think, under the way the city solicitor was reading it, that is the case today. But I'll be glad to discuss more with any of you offline.
Thank you, Charlie. And Rachel, thank you for your patience.
Sure, no worries. And in fact, I wasn't prepared to speak tonight, but I think that I just wanted to chime in, as does my puppy, apparently. So I'm Rachel Abel, 19 Echo Ave, and I just, you heard from me before, so I'm not going to repeat myself, but I think what former school committee president Chris Silverstein has shared with you tonight is on point. I appreciate her sentiments. I'm not as skilled in the role yet as the school committee president. I think she has a longer history and really truly understands the work. I think one of the messages I tried to tell you when we met on March 31st was it takes a steep learning curve to know what you don't know about the way that schools operate, and to really get to understand the three pillars of responsibility of the school committee. So I just wanted to thank her for speaking tonight and for sharing those thoughts. Additionally, I think Mr. Charlie Grimes shared a couple of opportunities for you to consider sharpening the language so there is less interpretation. I think I had shared with you the capital G, capital L general law definition as being one of the areas that caused some confusion, consternation, and that's it. Again, thank you for your service. Thank you for the opportunity to hear me tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. Mr. Grimes, can you just go back on the 3-year term just to kind of go over that one more time?
Yes. If you think about it, we have an election this year. Yeah, we do. This year for mayor. If next year we have a state election, if we had a 3-year term, 3 years from now, we would be having a state election for state senators and state representatives. And general law says you cannot do a municipal election the same year as you're doing a state election. So just the arithmetic of it is you can't do 3. You can do 4, you can do 2, you could do 6, I guess. Haven't thought about it. You could probably do 6. But the problem is that's one we just can't do it. At least that's my understanding. I have been wrong much more often in my life than I've been right.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. I also want to recognize Councilor Rand, who has joined us tonight. So thank you, Councilor. Julie.
I can't remember. I'm asking everyone else on the committee. I remember Jerry said something to us about the 3-year term. It wasn't that what Mr. Grimes said. It was something else. Does anyone else recall? Mike or Stacy, Hannah, Rich? I remember he gave a reason for it, and I wish I could recall what it was.
I believe Mr. Grimes is right in his analogy of what he's talking about, but I don't remember that conversation. But I just wanted to clarify to make sure it was clear for everybody. But I think I've heard that before, so I think Mr. Grimes is right on that. And I would
I'll try to dig it up in the minutes so we can remember to discuss it next time. But I remember Jerry explained something to us, and I don't think it was what Charlie said, but it might have been. I don't know.
That's fine.
So that was useless. Sorry.
We can go back. Next on, Hannah.
Great, and thank you all for the comments so far, all super helpful, and particularly as we go back to dig in more on the content. And I don't remember a comment on the 3-year terms before, but I know I had asked in a previous meeting about, why we are on odd year terms. Was that a state law? Because it is, municipal elections across the state. And so I had asked for that clarification. So maybe it was part of that conversation where we talked about kind of why they land where they do. But I had a question kind of to follow up, knowing that our speakers so far have been following this process really closely and, really starting to dig into the weeds. Just was curious what challenges you found so far in following this process, because I think we've so far been a little bit kind of under the radar in getting started. And for me, that's been kind of, not a problem so far, because we've been going through, we as a committee have been learning the history of the charter and getting to scan through article by article, ask clarifying questions, get the lay of the land, and start to identify what we'd like to come back to and discuss in more depth. We're at the point in the process now where we wanted to, basically see what we missed in that scan and raise things from public comment that we might not have considered yet, or might have considered, but need to hear how important they are to others in the city. And then as we go into this next round of really deliberating on what we want to report out, either for the kinds of changes that could be made through the city council and mayor, or raising issues that we think a commission should tackle if they are larger, and kind of what the pros and cons are there. As we go into that phase, really want to make sure that the work of the committee is visible and that the discussion is robust. So I know we've been having trouble getting access to meeting minutes and, just kind of getting that all the information out there, and it can be difficult to even locate the charter itself on the city website unless you know where you're looking. So for those of you who've been following closely and made it this far to make comments, just curious what has worked or hasn't, or if you have suggestions for us to bring more visibility into the process.
Thank you, Hannah. Rachel?
Yes, I have an inside track and I know how to make open records requests. And even I had a little bit of difficulty as I relayed on March 31st, following how far this committee had made it through. Often you were meeting on the same nights that the school committee was meeting, so I wasn't able to join in and watch real time. I think just generally the city is undergoing a website revamp, and right now you can search, but the results are all sort of a jumble. So anything that the city clerk's office might be able to do to help get some of your meeting records posted will definitely help. But in general, I had mentioned that there was a public hearing coming up, and most people don't even realize Beverly is a home rule charter. That might be a testament that the charter works really well and people just sort of show up for the municipal elections, and that's that. But I think that people are accustomed to looking to a website to get information, and right now it's really hard to access that. So thank you.
I can also talk to Lisa too to kind of, as we move forward in these next month, to make sure that that is accessible to people. It is clear, to make sure everybody has that information.
I was thinking about this a little bit too, because I think there were so many people who wanted to be on this committee, and it's such an important job. I was wondering if there might be a link right on the front page of the website that could direct people, Mr. Chairman, because I think that way it could help guide people and also give more visibility to what we're doing. And then even, I could put on my Facebook page, what we're talking about and send them right to the city or something like that.
That's fine. I have no problem with that. Let me talk to Lisa, and then we can kind of go from there. So basically the process from now on, after we close this public hearing, and I do think it's helpful because we really didn't discuss, at-large seats for the school committee, for instance, and whether the committee thinks it's, if we want to take a vote on that, we can do that. We think it's important to do and go from there, and to bring it to the city council. And remember, we could always make a recommendation to the city council, and the city council might want to tweak it as well to say, listen, we don't want to do the at-large, or we do want to add something. So I think we can go ahead and do that. Julie, did you have a question?
I was just adding to the notes so Charlene could mention, or you could mention it to Lisa, that when you click on the event, it doesn't give you the Google link. You have to download the agenda to get the Google link. So I think people, if people don't see download the agenda, they don't know how to get to this meeting.
Okay. Councilor Rand.
No. Okay, sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm only going to chime in because I just asked Ms. Kent about, can we put the links in the event detail today? Because if you may have noticed that the resiliency project meeting tonight had an event. You clicked on the event and it opened up and it had the link right there, and you could actually click on the link to join the meeting. So she did let me know that actually she doesn't have access to do that. So it's through the mayor's office, through Jocelyn, that you'll need to connect on that about. But I just sent Jocelyn an email today to see if we could do that for all the city meetings that are happening, because it is, I agree 100%. It's a little, it's not accessible to go to a PDF and then copy. You can't even copy and paste. You have to then, like, yeah, it's a pain. So, and thank you all for the work you're doing. This has been fun to be here and hear the comments and understand what your next steps are. So thank you.
Yeah. So speaking of next steps, so we can meet next week, the 21st. I know it's school vacation week, but we could do that, and then I'll do the 28th. The idea is to kind of, I think I can talk to the Collins Center to bring them in. This is when they're going to come in and kind of help us out a little bit. And then we can, and then I can also talk to Jerry, so we can kind of fine tune and kind of go article by, and we can always go back if we need to, but to make it easier, maybe take a couple articles a night to say, okay, listen, let's take a couple votes, what people think, and then can kind of go from there. Mr. Grimes, you had a question. Still on mute. There we go.
Okay, sorry. A couple of things. I am not certain, but I think it likely that you cannot create at-large school committee members except by a commission. I could be wrong on that, by an elected commission. I could be wrong on that, but that thought occurs to me. One other, just purely housing detail. One of the things I would suggest is when you are done with your work, make sure that your minutes are preserved on archival paper so that 20 years from now, people can refer back to what you did and why you did it. Much as today, you can refer back to what we did because one of our members made sure it was all preserved. So just make sure that the important work you're doing survives into the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. I think Brendan Sweeney had a question, and please state your address as well.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Brendan Sweeney. I live at 19 Federal Street. Just quickly to build off of Mr. Grimes' point, and I'll send the link. There is a provision of state law that I believe if you change the composition of an elected body or the terms, you do have to go through an elected charter commission. I'm going to put it in the chat. I'm sure the Collins Center knows much more than I do on the matter. But yeah, figured that was worth referencing since it came up.
Thank you, Brendan. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Hannah.
Yeah, just as we start to turn to the process going forward, for me, I would really like us to lay out, and so it's probably on our agenda for the next meeting to spend the time laying out which questions we want to come back to and how we want to tackle each of them. So agree, it makes sense to go article by article just based on the structure of the charter, but really for us to be able to pull out specific questions and categorize them as, okay, this is a question where we as a committee with input from the public can weigh some options. And this is something that we can actually, in our report to the city council, recommend action on because it's, one of those more like an amendment that the city council and mayor can move forward through the state and go through that process. And then categorize the other set of questions that we're, as a review committee, raising as ripe for potential change, even though our recommendations would not set that change in motion, that they would be changes that would need to go through an elected commission. But I would like us to still, as part of this committee's work, lay out, okay, we as a committee in reviewing the charter as it stands now and the state of the city and where we see the city going in the next 10 years, we think this is a time when, the terms of office or the composition of the school committee or one of those bigger things should be tackled. Like we as a committee feel it deserves that attention, even if we're not actually making the specific recommendation for the change, in part because of this issue of the charter is sort of the invisible infrastructure that not everyone in the city is necessarily paying attention to. And this is the time for us to sort of draw attention to things that, even if we're not making the change, we think need to be part of a public discussion and maybe a commission. So for us to be able to sort of sit down and with the consultants from the Collins Center to help us categorize, okay, this question goes in this bucket, this question goes in that bucket, and then to map out, what are the options for on this topic. That you could have 2-year terms, you could have 4-year terms. Here's the pros and cons of each, and make sure we're capturing all of that as we go, so that we have a final report that really is grouped logically and makes the case for specific recommendations that could be acted on, and makes the case for specific areas that we think the city needs to tackle now through other means. Does that make sense? Because I think it means kind of spending probably a whole meeting on just the mapping before we actually get to some of the questions, and having the consultants help on that mapping, so that we're not just diving into a vote on something within Article 1 at our next meeting.
Right. I think that's fair. That's a good recommendation. I think the next meeting we can bring the Collins Center in and with Mr. Perry's help, kind of discuss the kind of things you're talking about, some of the major issues, some of the major issues that we want to bring forward, and somewhere it might go into a charter commission, or it might have to go a different route. So we have a clear picture of that, and then we can kind of go back into the other articles and go from there. That's fine. I think that's a good recommendation. I see Julie. Do you have your hand up? Okay, Julie.
Just a quick comment to what Hannah's saying. I wonder too how far the Collins Center has taken the document based on the discussions too, because that might take some of our discussion away, where if they covered some of those things that we talked about, like the diversity and things like that, if they come to us and say, you had these issues, here's how we address them, and we can look at them, it might not need as deep of a dive as what Hannah's asking. So maybe we could get some clarification from Jerry about exactly how much they've done and what, and that can help us inform how we want to spend our next meeting.
Okay, I will reach out to Jerry and about the Collins Center and see what they've done, and then but we still, no matter what they've done, we still need to kind of like make that recommendation and say, listen, this is what we changed the diversity and in this, so people know what we changed. I think that's important. Good. Brendan, did you have your hand up again? No.
No, I didn't. Sorry. Good to go. Thank you.
Right. Go to Charlie.
Thank you. Very briefly, you may well have already done this, but as you know, there has to be a committee every 10 years. There was one in 2000. I don't know if there was in 2010. The 2000 committee did issue a report looking at, I think, Articles 1, 2, and 3. We didn't make it any farther than that. Which reminds me, one of the other things is the length of time that the committee has to report should be extended, not to the same not to the same calendar year, but for 18 months, so you have a little more time. But I recommend, if you have not already done so, take a look at the prior committee's work. You may save yourself the time of not having to reinvent wheels. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we actually did, maybe not 2000, but I think 2010, that Mr. Latta looked at, and I think they looked at some of the grammatical things that, for whatever reason, was never voted on. So that's kind of, whatever direction we go in, the way I look at this committee when they go to the city council, I like to recommend something. I think I don't think it's a good document. I don't think we need to change everything, unless we start to go to a 4-year term and, make that recommendation. But I know when we didn't vote for the 4-year term before, I think we were reluctant to do that because we were afraid that it was so controversial that the whole charter would have been not voted upon. So I think it would be nice to kind of this time. That's kind of adamant about whatever we decide. It would really be nice to kind of move this to the vote to the city council, which has not happened before, and also to the mayor. So it can, whatever direction we go in, we can move this forward. Because I do think there's a lot of good comments, and I think there is some members of this committee and people from the school committee that have commented, made a lot of good comments that we hadn't thought about. and it would be nice to kind of present this to the city council for a vote. And hopefully the mayor also agrees, so we can kind of move this forward. It would be nice, I think, for me too, because we spend time doing these things. The last thing you want to do would be on committees that don't do anything, right? So I think everybody has been really extremely helpful, and I think and some have more experience than others, and I think it's good to have that those questions that someone like Hannah, who haven't been involved in this before at this level, it's good to have someone like her to be like, hey, did you ever think of this? And yeah, no, we didn't. So I think this has been extremely helpful, having a kind of a diverse group of experience on here. So anybody else have any questions? So I'm going to take Hannah's recommendation. I'm going to talk to Jerry and Lisa and see what the Collins Center has done, and then we can kind of dive into it a little bit. And maybe I'll have Jerry kind of maybe send an email out too to kind of for clarifying questions, and so we can kind of get ready. Does the 21st sound okay to people for next week, or do you want to wait till the 28th?
I think I'm going to be away the 28th, so 21 is preferable for me, but don't change if it works for others.
No, we can always do the 21st, and then we can always do the 28th too. It's if one like Paul's not here tonight, so I'd rather kind of move forward a little bit, and before you know it, we're gonna be in the budget season. So I would like to do that. Let's try to go the 21st at 7 o'clock for next week, and I'll work with Lisa to set that up. And if I don't hear see any more questions, I'll adjourn this meeting. All set. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good night and have a good weekend. Meeting adjourned.